So I am Natasha Garcia-Andersen, and I am the Apiary Inspector in Washington, D.C., and I will be giving the presentation today. By the end of this workshop, we want to make sure that everyone knows why Tropilaelaps is a pest of concern, what to look for in your hives, and who to call with the suspected case. So that is very relevant to what's been happening in the last few weeks. We want to make sure that everyone knows if they find something, they know who to call and what the proper steps are. But first off, what is Tropi? There's our little friend right there. Well, not our friend, but the little guy we're going to be talking about. So first off, Tropilaelaps. So we're going to start calling it Tropi for first. So it's Tropilaelaps. Um, I used to not be able to spell it, but in the last few years, I've gotten really good at saying it and spelling it. It's pretty long, but we're going to refer to it as Tropi, Tropi for short, throughout this presentation. So when you break it down, the classification, it's in the kingdom Animalia, phylum Arthropods. So it's an invertebrate with an exoskeleton. Anthrop it's an arachnid, so it's got 8 legs. It's not an insect. So like our other favorite mite, the Varroa mite, also has 8 legs. Um, Mesostigmata, it's a parasitic mite. And the Laelapidae just means it's a diverse group of mites associated with mammals and arthropods. And Tropilaelaps are a specific type of mites that all have Apis as host. So you have to remember that it's just not Apis mellifera. There are a variety of Apis around the world. So that's how we classify Tropilaelaps. So Tropilaelaps mites have 4 species. And like I said, the apis are their hosts. So there's Tropilaelaps, Mercedisae, Clariae, Tai, and I can't even say the last one, I'm sorry, Conigrium. So the one that we are concerned with is Tropilaelaps Mercedisae. And that is associated, you'll notice with all of these, with one we're worried about is Apis dorsata. So Apis dorsata is the giant honeybee. So that's the really big one. And that is the one that is associated with the Tropilaelaps mites, the Mercedisae. So in this presentation, when we refer to the Tropi mite, we're going to be referring to the species Tropilaelaps mercedisae and its association with Apis mellifera. If you go back into some of the literature early on, it's going to talk about Clariae, and that is because they had mis-ID'd it as Clariae when it was really Mercedisae, so it gets a little confusing. So if you read older stuff, it says Clariae, but they were really talking about Mercedisae. So, so the one that goes to Apis mellifera has always been Tropilaelaps mercedisae. So it gets a little confusing, but it's always Tropilaelaps mercedisae. So we'll talk about Tropi, its host, and its current distribution. So its main host or its original host is Apis dorsata, the giant honeybee. So those are found in Asia. They have a single comb. They hang from trees or high buildings and stuff. It's out in the open. They are not in cavities or anything. On here, you can see it on basically a tree branch, and they do a seasonal migration. So they hang out in trees, and because they're just out in the open during the rainy season, they head out and they go to the mountains, and then they'll hang out there. And then when the rainy season's over, they come back to the area they were in before. So, and then they moved from the Tropilaelaps mite, moved from the original host of Apis dorsata to Apis mellifera. Because remember, Apis mellifera are European honeybees, so they weren't originally found in Asia. So when they were introduced into Asia, Tropilaelaps mites moved on to Apis mellifera. Apis mellifera has multi-combs, as we know, we keep them in colonies. And they do seasonal movement for pollination. They don't migrate on their own. Humans kind of migrate them for them when we do pollination services. So mite dispersal in the bees is, even though they're very different in the way that they, um, are in trees, honeybees are in colonies, it's the way that the mites disperse themselves is similar because of drifting, robbing, foraging, and because of beekeeper movement. So the drifting happens because Apis dorsata, the way that the colonies are built, even though they're not in hives like Apis mellifera, on these tree branches, they are in very close proximity, just like a hive would be in an apiary. So drifting happens, robbing happens. It can happen when they're foraging. And just like with beekeeper movement, Apis mellifera, they're not migrating. The beekeepers are moving them for pollination services, while as Apis dorsata, they're moving because they migrate on their own because of the seasons. So then the mites will move with them. So that's how these mites are getting dispersed, um, because of humans in the case of Apis mellifera, and just because of the migration of the bees in Apis dorsata. So this is the current range of Tropilaelaps mites in Apis mellifera. These are all ones that have been peer reviewed. There's like been rumors or someone saw it in something. These are all ones that we worked with Auburn University where actually were papers published and accounts of Tropilaelaps mites on Apis mellifera. So as you can see, it has been moving west, which is of concern to us, especially the parts in Georgia and in the part of Russia. They're getting really close to Europe, so that's a little concerning, right? Because of the way that beekeepers move bees and stuff. Um, that's why we're here. It's moving just like Varroa had moved. Tropilaelaps is moving. So, like as you can see how Varroa spread, it took about 35 to 37 years to get to the US. And so we're like, Tropilaelaps mites got into Apis mellifera in Asia about in the 60s. So it's not as, if it took it 35 years, it would have been in here in the 90s, but it hasn't gotten there. But the way with the movement we've seen with just how everything with the global economy stuff is moving a lot faster than it did back in the even the 80s and 90s. So it's, we don't know when it's going to get here, how it's going to get here, but that's why we all have to be pretty vigilant and learn about it now. So let's learn a bit about its basic life cycle, its biology, and its behavior. So, um, so this is the Tropilaelaps mite and how its life cycle goes. As you can see in here, the adult female mite enters the brood cell right before it's capped. She lays an egg. The thing with them the main thing with them is that they can mate several times, and the females mites are usually found, they've already been mated. And so once they're in here, they can cause a lot of damage because they have multiple feeding points on a developing bee. Unlike a Varroa mite, they will just go to multiple points on a bee and can cause a lot of damage. And there's more of them. And then when the mites come out, they've already mated. They have a very short phoretic phase. They don't really need to be out. They can go out of the cell and go right back into another cell, lay some more eggs, and start making more mites. So that's a real problem. That it's bad. It's a really bad time for the bees in those cells, and then the mites are just having a heyday and they're just making more mites. So it causes a lot of damage to the bees. And so you can see on here, when you compare it side by side with Varroa, when the bee emerges, you can get, like with the Varroas, you get 1.6 mites. when a worker bee emerges with Tropilaelaps, you're coming out with almost double that. You're coming out with 3 mites. And then when a drone comes out, you're coming out with 4.5 mites versus 2.6. So you're almost getting double the amount of mites coming out with a Tropilaelaps mite versus a Varroa mite. And remember, when they're in their feeding, they're feeding off of multiple sites on that developing bee. So a lot of times when those bees come out, they could be missing part of an antenna, an eye missing, a big chunk of missing on their sides. So they can come out really, really deformed, makes them weak and more susceptible to disease. Like I said, the phoretic phase is only 1 to 2 days. You can see adult mites running along the comb for dispersal. And unlike varroa mites, they can't even feed on the adult bees. They're just running out there looking for a new spot to go and make more mites. The reproductive phase is around 14 days, feeding on hemolymph, use multiple sites on the bees. Um, they don't need to feed prior to reproducing. They're just like little reproducing machines, right? That's all they want to do is just make more of them. And remember, a lot of this, the main thing I want people to take away is that they can reproduce really fast and they can cause a lot of damage to the bees and make them really susceptible to disease and to deformities. So it's really bad. So as far as identification, there's a lot of lookalikes. And a lot of times, if you're not used to looking in your hive and seeing all the weird things that are going on there, you might see something that looks a little out of place and wonder what it is. So these are just some of the lookalikes that people have found, like pollen mites, varroa flies, even a male varroa mite might look like a Tropi mite. So this was something that was found in July of this year. And it was reported to the New Hampshire Apiary Inspector by the local beekeeper. They found this and they're like, "Whoa, what is this thing?" So they did the right thing. They reported it to get ID'd by the state. They reported it to the Apiary Inspector, and then they found out that it was actually a parasitillus or like a pollen mite. So it wasn't a trophy. It ended up being a type of a pollen mite. But so lesson learned here, if you see something, take it to get ID'd so we can figure out what's going on. So if you want to compare them side by side, you'll see that the Tropilaelaps mite is they're about the same length, but it's a lot thinner um, than a Varroa mite. But it can cause a lot more damage. And they're pretty small. Like we're used to seeing um, Varroa mites, and when you see a Tropilaelaps mite, you realize how small they are. Um, Varroa mites to me always look red, and when I saw a Tropilaelaps mite in person, I was like, they almost look like grayish, like when you think of like the alien colors, like little gray men, they didn't really look red to me, so that made it a little harder to see. But when you look at them, this is a size comparison of putting one on a penny. It's going to be like the size of it's the size of the zero on the 2015 here. So they're super small. They're really small. So they're a little hard to see. So like I said, their body is longer than they are broad and their legs are visible from above. And their front legs, even though they have 8 legs, they keep 6 on the ground and they keep the 2 up like little antennas, like little feelers. So they're a little crazy looking when they're running around with their 2 feet in the air. So here is a video and I'll show you them running across a frame and you'll see they kind of have like a start-stop motion. To me, it kind of reminds me like when you see a squirrel trying to run across the street, how like runs and stops and runs and stops. Um, so they have a really distinct movement across a frame. So I'll go ahead and share this with you. And those things in front that look like antenna, those are actually their front legs. Oops, stop. No, I can't get it to go to the next one. Okay, so oops. So as far as monitoring, there's several ways that you can monitor for Tropilaelaps mite, because honestly, once you see them running across the frames, that's probably already pretty infested. When we saw them running everywhere, you know, you're in already pretty bad shape. So this is listed from the most effective to the least effective. Obviously, eDNA is going to be the most effective, but it's not really the most available to everybody. You also can do some uncapping and just going through the brood, because that's where they're hiding out, is with the brood, you know, but that's most effective, but it's also very time consuming and very destructive. Sticky boards, bump tests, sugar shakes, alcohol washes, and visual inspections. So we'll go through all those different types of methods. So like I said, inspection is the least effective. It's almost impossible when bees are on frames. Like you can see that tiny little mite hanging out right there on the eye. You really have to be looking to see it. Or when they're running around the frame, like I said, they don't need to be out of the cell very long. So probably by the time you've seen them visually, it's probably a pretty bad infestation. Like here's the one running on a frame. Also, this bee's having a bad day, it's got a Varroa and a Tropi mite on it. But remember, when they're on the bee, they're not actually feeding. They're just kind of hitching a ride to go find somewhere to feed. Another one just hanging out on a frame. You can also look for mite damage, very similar to mite damage just from Varroa. Um, Brood reduction, decline in development, spotty irregular brood pattern, like if they're starting to pull them out, dead bees, deformed bees, bald brood and capping pupae, like if you know something's going on, holes in the capping, if the colony absconds, lower honey yield, higher wax moth infestation, viruses. Um, so all these things that are also can indicate Varroa damage or also can indicate that there's Tropilaelaps damage. But as a beekeeper, you already know that if all these things are going on, your hive's already in pretty bad shape, regardless of what type of mite you have going on. So I'm sure you're probably familiar with the sugar shake or alcohol wash. So it's not that effective because, like I said, they have such a limited short phoretic phase. So if you're going to grab the bees and shake them, doing the classic sugar shake or alcohol wash, you may get a few, but it's not going to give you a really good idea of what that mite load is going to be because, like I said before, they're not going to spend that much time not under in a brood cell. So it works, but it's not the most effective. Sticky board is pretty effective, but it's very time consuming and it's difficult to see. Um, when we did this in Thailand, I swear I was gonna go blind. It hurt my eyes so bad. And also if you're not used to looking at doing this on the regular, if you're not used to looking at your sticky boards, it's going to be really trying because you don't realize how much debris there just is on a sticky board. And if you're looking at so much, you're like starting to question your sanity. Like, is that a leg? Is that just a piece of dirt? So it's really difficult and time consuming. I've talked to my beekeepers about that, and I was like, might be good practice just to get an idea of this and get used to looking at your sticky boards so you know what's usual to see in a hive. So when you start to see things that are unusual, you can say, hey, that doesn't look like it belongs there. So sticky boards are effective, but very time consuming and it's really hard to see. I don't know if any of you guys saw those cards that we gave out like at ABF, and a lot of the inspectors took back that had a shot of a sticky board showing like a whole bunch of junk and you can look for the mites on there. So something like that's a good kind of tool to give out to some beekeepers for them to get an idea to start looking for things that might be mites or might be just, detritus from a hive. The bump test is less effective. It kills larvae, destroys comb. Um, it works, but it's also you're going to start going through there and looking for stuff. It's time consuming and it's destructive. like I said, uncapping, physically pulling them out. When we were doing this in Thailand, you pull them out and sometimes the trophy literally run out because they were in there, destroying stuff. But so you're going to pull, you're going to take a big chunk of them, just start pulling them out and seeing what you see. Um, yeah, it's still really hard. So eDNA can be the most effective, it's costly, and the few labs offer the service. So this was, hopefully we can figure out a way to make this more cost effective, but for now it's not something that's really practical. But hopefully we could figure out a way to do this more cost effectively and have more labs do it. But we found this to be the most effective way. So you're probably like, oh, this sounds great. None of this really works. But just getting used to and looking for things is really important for beekeepers. So just to go over it again, the eDNA is the most effective, costly, and the few labs offer the service. Uncapping is really effective, but time consuming. Sticky board, for me, I feel like it's kind of a good middle of the road, is effective and time consuming. It's a little difficult to see the mites. Bump test, less effective, kills larvae, destroys comb. Sugar shake alcohol, it works, but it's limited because the short phase where the bees are not under a cell, and visual inspection is less effective and almost impossible when the bees are on the frame. So those are all the methods that we have now to use to look for Tropilaelaps mites. So why are Tropi mites a pest of concern? Well, the distribution is currently expanding its geographic range. As you saw, every time you look at a map or you hear about some rumor, it's heading west, right? So this is something we have to be concerned about. And we learned in the last few weeks with all these rumors that, things travel. And so it's something that we have to keep on our radar. And because of its behavior, that it reproduces faster than Varroa, has rapid population growth, and it feeds primarily on brood under the wax cappings, and it moves very quickly on the frames. Like this is something that if it did get here, can cause a lot of damage to our hives. Impact on a colony, similar to Varroa damage, and it creates a Varroa Tropi complex. So if you can have both of them, which would be really bad. It also spreads viruses, and it can cause and can kill developing pupae and inflict feeding wounds on pupae. Like I said, it doesn't just feed on one spot like Varroa, it feeds on multiple spots. So it can cause a lot of damage, not just on spreading viruses, but also just physical damage to causing deformed bees when they emerge. Also can cause rapid colony collapse. Unmanaged infestations quickly kill colonies. When we talked to beekeepers in Thailand, they were throwing everything they could at Tropi mites to keep them managed in their hives. And if they didn't do anything, the colonies didn't stand a chance. They were going to go down pretty quick. So they're not the same, but it's something we do have to keep an eye on. So essential roles of beekeepers, this is something that we think we really need to focus in on. So as apiary inspectors, we've been doing a lot of initiatives, working with Anna and your group, working to train in extension agents. We've been also working to train fellow inspectors on Tropilaelaps. Like we had the training down in Auburn. We've also been, having our presence with like at ABF and AHPA, working with Kappa, also with Colas. Did this whole thing going with Auburn to Thailand, getting funding through PAM, meeting with APHIS, with USDA, doing the National Honeybee thing, and also working with the Honeybee Health Coalition. So we've been doing a lot of stuff to try to get ourselves educated and just get out there and learn as much as we can. And as extension educators, you guys have all been getting all this information so that you can reach out to the beekeepers. So we think it's really important also for the beekeepers to understand their roles, that they're the ones that are out there in their hives. We want beekeepers to be engaged and for everyone to work together to prevent and prepare for an incursion if something were to happen, whether it's when they see something to reach out to their extension agent or reach out to their apiary inspector, and if they see something that they need help with or they have questions about. So we all can work together for bee health. So we need beekeepers to monitor their hives, maintain healthy hives, to stay informed, develop a good working relationship with their state apiary inspector. So when they see something or if they have questions, they can go to them for help. So what do you need to do if you suspect you find a trophy mite? Collect it, store it, and report it. It's kind of a catchy little tune there. So collect it. You can get some hive debris, bring us some pupae, an adult bee, brood frame, comb, alcohol wash, sugar shake, take a video, a picture. A lot of times people call us and tell us things, and we're not always close to um, our beekeepers or even the general public. When they tell me some stuff, I'm just like, can you take me a picture, video? Sometimes that's really helpful um, to get us an idea what they're talking about. Then store it, put the material collected and dry in a container with alcohol and store it on a counter, put a sample collected in a dry container and stored in a freezer. Report it to regulatory officer. If you don't know who your inspector is, go to the website. It has everyone listed in the US and Canada. Because there are proper channels that have to go through um, so things get reported. Even if you think you found a trophy mite in your hive and you bring it somewhere, someone from the state regulatory agency is going to have to go out there and collect it themselves. There's a whole chain of custody that's going to have to go through, and then they're going to have to go to the USDA and APHIS. So there's a whole process that has to go through it. So definitely, if you see it's kind of like see something, say something, and then you need to report it so we can make sure that we get everything in order so we can go through the proper channels. So additional resources for everyone. We have been working on this website, honeybeepest.org. We have really built out the Tropilaelaps portion of it. There's lots of information. There's a lot of great pictures and videos and stuff. So if you need more information about Tropilaelaps mite, this is a great resource. We worked with Auburn and worked with Pam on it. We're working on the other pest on there, so like Varroa. Everything else is in the works, but the Tropilaelaps part is pretty much built out. So a great resource to have on hand. So use it, and that is it.